There are moments in life when the truth doesn't knock, it breaks the door. Sometimes it shows up in a difficult conversation, sometimes in a painful discovery, and in my case, it arrived in a cold, surgical text message. I disown you. Talk to my lawyer. That message hit my screen like a verdict. But here's what most people don't realize. Being disowned isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's the exact push you need to reclaim what has been yours all along, your clarity, your money, and your freedom. Right there, with the light in my Denver kitchen flickering, almost as if it sensed the collapse of an old narrative, I typed only, okay. And I share this because many people mistake silence for submission, when silence can actually be an act of agency, an act of someone finally waking up to favoritism, control, manipulation, and the ATM role others built around them. The paradox is simple. When you stop begging for love, the people who exploited you start to panic. When you reclaim your clarity, they lose their power. And in that space, between the sting and the beginning of freedom, I made the decision nobody expected. I withdrew every cent of my own money, the same money that kept the house running, paid the bills, funded the golden child, and even covered the mortgage on the Glendale house. What seemed like a financial move cracked open a larger journey of exposure, truth, investigation, and justice. But before I tell you how their world collapsed, let me show you how mine began to rebuild. It felt almost ironic when the notification popped up, right as the light in the Denver kitchen started flickering like it sensed what was coming. Uncle Robert had sent the video with no explanation, just a truth long overdue. On the screen, the whole family sat around the dining table, laughing, relaxed, comfortable, as if her emotional exile had never existed. And then the blow. Harold saying she's not a daughter, she's a walking ATM, with the kind of coldness that confuses love with control. Every second felt like her past being shattered, not by sadness, but by clarity. Marilyn didn't hesitate before adding humiliation. Let her feel useful, reinforcing a role she never chose, the scapegoat. Evan, the golden child, smirked and called her pathetic, unaware that the video would mark the beginning of the end for their system of favoritism, manipulation, and implicit gaslighting. It wasn't just a recording, it felt like an emotional autopsy, exactly as she thought. It didn't look like a home video, it looked like an autopsy of my childhood. And as she watched, something inside her finally began to awake. What surprised her most was the absence of panic, sadness, or any desire to beg for validation. Instead, she felt consciousness, as if someone had opened a window and let the cold air of truth sweep in. She saw exploitation, entitlement, and forced obedience all lined up like unpaid debts. When Harold said, "I disown you," thinking it was punishment, he only accelerated a collapse already in motion. And her silence, for the first time, wasn't submission. It was power preparing her for the next step. When she stepped out onto the balcony, the cold Denver air hit her face like a real wake-up call, pulling her out of the emotional fog and delivering pure clarity. Away from the video, away from their voices, the truth settled in with a sharpness she couldn't ignore. Watching the fall air move through the buildings, she realized that she wasn't living through a family crisis. She was waking up from one. Silence became a metaphor, not punishment, but the early shape of freedom. And that awareness felt almost forbidden. That's when she saw the full scale of their control. They weren't struggling, they were orchestrating dependency, the same way someone adjusts a mortgage to keep another person locked in fear of overdue payments. She wasn't the heart of the Glendale house, she was the financial backbone built out of convenience, not love. That realization forced her to revisit her entire history with harsher, sharper eyes. Harold, Marilyn, and the golden child never needed her emotionally, only her transactions. Then came the thought that split her world open. I wasn't part of the family, I was part of the budget. The sentence echoed like a verdict, bringing years of exploitation and masked submission into focus. But alongside the pain arose strength, a slow, steady sense of agency building itself inside her. In that moment, leaning on the balcony rail, she knew the next step wouldn't be emotional. It would be strategic. She walked back inside with a calm that felt almost surgical, the kind of cold precision that arrives when someone truly wakes up. Her first move was simple: cancel everything. The mortgage? Canceled. The Glendale house bills? Closed. Every automatic transfer that turned her into a walking ATM? Eliminated one by one. Each click felt like cutting a thread of control. An agency finally began to settle into her hands. Then she opened her laptop and created a document titled Payments, a detailed record, line by line, like an auditor exposing the anatomy of a crime. Every transaction that kept them comfortable while she carried emotional weight and pressure was laid out clearly. Watching the spreadsheet grow was like watching years of exploitation take shape in undeniable form. And with every entry, her silence transformed from submission into exposure. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, panic erupted. Harold calling nonstop, Marilyn scrambling to manipulate the narrative, Evan spiraling as the financial structure began to collapse. But she stayed calm, precise, methodical, almost serene, like someone finally freed from a web she didn't weave. And the analogy fit perfectly. Every cancellation was a pair of scissors cutting a thread of the web. She knew this was only the beginning. The messages started like sparks of desperation, the kind that appear when entitlement meets reality. First Harold, "You're ruining your father's life." Then Marilyn, wrapping guilt in fake concern, using the same old emotional manipulation. And finally Evan, the golden child, throwing insults as if he still had the authority to punish her. Watching their mask fall so quickly revealed what had always powered their dynamic: fear. When guilt didn't work, the threats arrived. Stop being dramatic. It's fascinating how people who depended on her stability suddenly minimized their own collapse. The Glendale house fell into overdue status for the first time, the mortgage hanging by a thread, their supposed financial rights evaporating. Each notification they received was the result of their own misconduct, yet they still tried to dump blame on her, the lifelong scapegoat. But this time, she wasn't available for emotional labor. And then came her most powerful act. She ignored them. She blocked Harold, muted Marilyn, left Evan talking to himself. Silence, once used to punish her, became her shield, her clarity, her agency. While they drowned in the consequences they created, she stepped into justice, truth, and a reconstruction they never saw coming. That silence wasn't the end. It was the doorway to investigation. When she walked into the lawyer's office, she expected talk of lawsuits or retaliation, some formal threat from Harold meant to intimidate her. But the lawyer was blunt. There was no case, no action filed. The talk to my lawyer line had been nothing more than another tool of control, another bluff to keep the ATM daughter obedient. That revelation opened the door to something bigger: investigation. With patience and precision, she began cross-checking documents, digging through reports, analyzing old files, a true emotional and financial excavation. That's when she discovered irregularities in a community fund Harold managed, years of suspicious transactions, evidence of misconduct as clear as the video that exposed favoritism and emotional exile. Each line of data illuminated another corner of the darkness she had grown up in. Truth doesn't destroy, it exposes. And then came the human revelations, the ones that sting deeper than numbers. Her cousin Mia confessing an old abuse Harold had buried, Dana, her mother's friend, detailing what Marilyn had done behind the scenes, and the unmistakable pattern of control, punishment, and exploitation spanning generations. With every line I read, she thought, another piece of the truth came into the light, and that growing clarity demanded one final step: a confrontation.
When Harold showed up at her door, the symbolism was unavoidable. He was trembling, and she was steady, breathing the same cold air that marked the beginning of her clarity. He tried reviving the old script, the one built on control and emotional debt. "You owe me this." The entitlement in his voice was unmistakable, as if she still existed to fix the mess he created. But standing in front of her was not a father, it was the man who had disowned her. She opened the folder of documents with a calm born from truth, not anger. Every irregularity, every suspicious transaction, every evidence of misconduct was organized inside, a mirror Harold couldn't avoid. When she placed the file in his hands, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't tremble. She simply said, with agency and clarity, "I owe you nothing, and you disowned me, remember?" The sentence carried years of silence, finally transformed into truth. The click of the door closing behind him was more than sound. It was a symbol. The end of a lifetime of exploitation, the collapse of the Glendale house as an emotional prison, the final break in the narrative that kept her small. In that moment, she realized that true freedom wasn't defeating Harold, it was choosing to leave the table where she had never been treated as family. And that ending opened space for something greater than justice: rebirth.
In the end, the biggest revelation wasn't about Harold, Marilyn, or the golden child Evan. It was about her, about realizing that when someone tries to turn you into a scapegoat, a source of money, or an instrument of control, the only real escape is reclaiming your clarity. Maybe you've lived a version of this too, not necessarily a disownment, but a kind of quiet exhaustion where you're treated like the solution, but never like someone who needs care. So ask yourself, where in your life are you still accepting a role you never chose? At what table are you sitting, trying to belong while the cost is your peace? And more importantly, what would happen if you gave your own okay, not as surrender, but as liberation, as agency, as courage? It's uncomfortable at first, but life-changing in the end. Sometimes justice begins the moment you stop explaining yourself. So here's my invitation. Apply what you learned here. Question, observe, document, protect yourself, and above all, choose a life where breathing doesn't hurt. And if this video opened even a small internal door for you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with me. There is much more for you to hear, and I want to walk this journey with you.